So as I said, we're launching the beautiful paper that has been written by Aria Mazinho this evening. Before we kick into the dialogue with our wonderful, wonderful panel, I'll just give a little brief bit of context before you get completely bored of the sound of my voice, on kind of how we ended up here and how we ended up having this conversation tonight with these people in the room. So Africans in the Diaspora is housed at the Africa team of Thousand Currents. And the program partners of Thousand Currents work on the issues of food sovereignty, climate justice, and economic justice. And one of the dialogues that we found coming up in the early conversations when we relaunched in 2020 with Africans in the Diaspora was around the piece around economic justice, and how we found that people were relating to it in a way that didn't always visualize or appreciate what the African, Afrodescendant, and Black cultures and communities were bringing to the table in this sphere of economic justice. It was something that people could easily identify with when they looked at their own cultures and communities, but there wasn't necessarily an articulation on how these kind of economic practices that were embodying the kind of ecological and social justice piece were inherent, were embedded, were part of the story. And so we commissioned this piece on African liberatory economics to really uplift that innovation of African solutions to the climate crises, the economic crises that we're seeing. And this taps in both, and we'll speak about this more, practices that are from the past, practices that are just being born as we speak, things that we're expecting to kind of shift and grow as they develop. And I think they're all of these practices speak to this kind of narrative of what liberatory economic practices are and can be. And yeah, so we're just excited to share that kind of reflection. And I think this piece is really strong in anchoring that narrative, that articulation. I think Aria's done a fantastic job of uplifting those practices and contextualizing them in the kind of current crises and how these are solutions that we're talking about that are being lived out on a daily basis already. So yeah, we'll jump into the conversation. We are just a couple of kind of housekeeping points. We're gonna have about 45 minutes for contributions from the panel, and then we'll have about half an hour afterwards for questions. The Q&A box is open from now, so whenever a question does come to you, don't hesitate to drop it in there. The chat box is closed, but you can use the Q&A to dialogue with the panel. And you can also, if you have even more to say and it won't fit in the Q&A box, you can jump on social media, use the hashtag AID practicing liberation, which I'll just drop in the chat as well. And also, if you need a break at any point, please take your time, make a tea, do whatever you need to do, because this is all going to be recorded so you can catch up later as well. And so yeah, without further ado, I will start by kicking off our panel by introducing the author of this text, Aria Mazinho. Would you like to say a few words before I do the whole spiel?
I'd like to say a big hello to everyone that came and showed up, to everyone, the team. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, I'm boiling in excitement and nervousness. It's very surreal, right? That a work that started as an idea, as a Africa and diaspora idea, and went through, different hands and different minds, sort of comes through, and then we are launching today. So I'm ecstatic, and thank you so much. I'm Aria Mazinho, as you say. I'm Angolan, an economic thinker. I'd like to call myself an activist. Yeah, but above all, I think a concerned and engaged citizen, and very much happy to be here and sharing the space with the comrades and the sisters. So yeah, thank you, Zara.
Beautiful, thank you so much, Aria. I'm equally excited to jump into this conversation. So yeah, just a quick word on Aria and her background. So she is a political economist and feminist organizer from Luanda, Angola, as she said. Her work lies at the intersection of research, movement building, and advocacy to challenge the root causes of economic inequalities and explore pathways to change. She's reflected on labor relations in the Angolan informal economy, on the impact of militarization and extractivism on violence against women in Mozambique, and on the challenges to feminist organizing in Angola. And Araya comes to this research primarily as a learner, seeking to deepen her knowledge of revolutionary African politics and practice relating to the economy and connecting with African, Black, and Afro-descendant people leading these struggles around the world. And in the live document, you can follow the links to all of Araya's work as well and read more of her fantastic thinking. And next up, I'll introduce to you Sophia. Sophia, would you like to just say a quick hello to everyone?
Buenas tardes con todas. Bueno, buenas tardes aquí, buenos días y buenas noches en otros lugares. Es un gusto verlas a todas. También a las participantes, a las espectadoras que están en este webinario. Muy agradecida con las ancestras y los ancestros que permitieron que este milagro esté ocurriendo, y agradecer profundamente los esfuerzos de Tausan Correns, de Sara, de Luam, de Aurea, que están haciendo este sueño un camino para muchas y para muchos. Eso.
Thank you for that beautiful opening and blessing, it felt like, Sophia. So yeah, a quick few words on Sophia, who is a Black woman, mother and neighbor, Pan-Africanist. She's a member of the Process of Black Communities and the mobilization of Black women for the care of life and ancestral territories. She's also a coordinator, sorry, excuse me. And she's also a coordinator of the Gender-Based Violence Observatory, Vihia Afro. Her work centers on collective and women's rights and their relationship with the policies that mediate them. It investigates mechanisms that support racial and supremacist projects and their installation, updating, and deinstallation. Thank you, Sophia. This is bubbling for me nicely. I'm like, oh, it's people that we're just in a room with. It's so exciting. We'll go over to Noni, shall we? Noni, would you like to tell us a few words on yourself?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and so grateful for Aria's work on this amazing project, and also just reading it as well. It's just mind-blowing, and also to meet Sophia as well. I'm just excited to be here, and that's all I have to say.
Brilliant, thank you. So a few words on Noni. So Nonhala Mukuyana, they, them, is an educator, multidisciplinary artist, and new economics organizer. They're a co-founder of Decolonizing Economics, a grassroots collective working to build a new economy movement that is rooted in racial justice principles and decolonial struggle. Their work involves investing in communities of color who are working to build an economic democracy, enabling shared strategizing resource distribution and providing expertise. So with those incredible human beings, we are going to kick off the panel. And so, yeah, I will just invite any of you to kind of respond when called. There's no particular order of speaking. So don't feel like you have to kind of wait for anything. So yeah, the first question is basically what drew you, each of you, to this piece of work? What made you feel like it was something that needed to happen and that you felt drawn to and called to?
So it's any of us. So I'll go.
Yeah, I'm already like, okay, do I need to start picking on people?
Let me break the ice and welcome my comrades here. Zara, that's a beautiful question to start, because I think the work is never just what's written, right? It's very much what draws us into it. And there are a number of things that made me say yes to this work, to this piece. One was because AID Africa and Diaspora had such an amazing experience working with the program. So that was great already. So I knew I was going to capable hands of people that care about the political aspects of the work. It's not just something to be put on paper And, and even though the design is beautiful, and it's not something that will die there. But secondly, it was internalizing internal reflection and thinking that up to this paper, and even now outside of this paper, my own research and advocacy on economic justice had been very much focused in the realm of policy, particularly state policy, and alternatives. So I'd never, and we can say this is a blind spot in my own training as an economist, which is not uncommon, or even in the way we've conceptualized how we think about the economy in our movement, where I'm based, or the movements at least that I'm exposed to, we'd hardly ever engage from the perspective of economic justice and from a point of practice, and practice that is rooted in community practice. So sometimes we say, well, let's engage macroeconomic policy or even microeconomic policy, and then we'll think of what the practices that we can marshal to make these policies reach to fruition. But hardly ever the process is the opposite, where we say, well, these practices exist, and then it's important that they can maybe show us the way into what the future looks like. And what the future looks like, even outside of what we conceptualize as the state. So for me, that was very clear from the concept note, and it's something that really made me want to say yes, because it's something that I hadn't engaged with before, and I was curious. I think the first step about conducting work is you being curious about it, and I was very curious. And then I think a final aspect was the possibility of engaging with scholars, activists, thinkers that had been doing this work in the communities, in the constituencies, had been following African diaspora work, had seen some of the webinars. So I knew there would be a great opportunity to connect with amazing people around the world that are leading, not only the thought process, but are really leading what I call, in no light terms, a revolution into how we should live our lives in more meaningful and fuller ways. And it just was so that we are here in this room today with this amazing, Non-Tlantla and Janya, which have really, and I say this very deliberate, this research is as much as it's mine as it is theirs, because by the time I came on board, there were already people that were there and had been contacted. So I come into a space of also comfort knowing that I'm speaking and I'm going to be engaging with people that are very interested in this and can help co-building and co-creating this work. Yeah, so for me, I think that was it.
That's just actually reminded me before we go on. Do you also want to, as you're speaking, just explain a little bit your relations to the work and how you ended up working on it? Because I haven't actually explained that process, have I?
So I've done that, right?
I can go next. So the way I got working on this amazing project is because I'm a very big fan of Zara, a huge fan of Zara. So Zara had just, and I knew that Zara had been working on really interesting work around like thinking about money and like resourcing and investing in communities of color in the UK, because I'm based in the UK. And then I got this email and then I was like, oh my God, that looks so exciting. And a lot of, especially in the UK, a lot of these conversations are rarely had because much of economic thought and practice is severely like whitewashed and is incredibly male and very like hetero. And so I was just so amazed to actually be called to be having these conversations. And as Aure was saying, of just like from a place of interest with other people that I know who are also interested in a way that is not, because I sometimes find like, under white knowledge making, like interest can sometimes be like really dehumanizing, or people being interested in specific things can be really dehumanizing on the communities that they are like focusing on and like researching upon. And like when I heard about this research, it sounded like it was really embedded in the communities that it was seeking to kind of archive the work of, and it was really embedded in the practice of compassion and like care and trust, which is such an important thing. I think that is often like overlooked when people are doing any form of research. So that was one part of it. And also in the UK at Decolonizing Economics, there's I find that there's a lot of like pessimism, or like people, especially like young people of color who I work with a lot, people are really like pessimistic about their own economic futures and their own forms of like autonomy and agency around how they can engage within the economy and like subvert the economy, because there's no examples, right? So like I can go into a space and be like, oh, you know, there's a history of cooperatives, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, well, I've never read that. So is that actually true? Is that something that I can do for myself? And so when I was invited to be part of this research, I was so excited that this was going to archive so much work that goes just invisibilized by like the history of like the subjugation of people of color. And it was really exciting to me because I think as an organizer, it's easier when there's examples, right? And it's easier to know that people have done stuff before and that maybe they failed or maybe they didn't. Like just knowing that there's something that exists before you is something that I found really energizing in my work, and I know is really helpful for other people. So I was so excited. And especially at Decolonizing Economics, people ask about like, well, what is the alternative? And you're just like, I don't know, I'm not an encyclopedia. So it was really great that now there's like a thing that, or like a resource that to be part of this project, that there was going to be a creation of a resource that people can continue to come back to as well. And I really liked the ways that Aria approached this work, in that, like, you know, there's histories that are not necessarily, you know, like the histories that we have internally within our own like family generations, and there's like, you know, expansive like global histories or like national histories, that there's just so many ways of looking at economics for liberation. And that's why I was really excited about taking part in this work, and I think it's so necessary.
Bien, me dio la impresión de que Sara le había pedido a Aurea que ampliara un poco de cómo había llegado al trabajo, o me confundí y sigo con la respuesta a la pregunta.
I was saying to have a bit of a background on the specific role you played in relationship to the work, in the sense of, so Aria was brought on as the kind of author of it, as being the person who wrote the whole piece, and then you and Noni's roles were as, yeah, I don't know what the words you would use to describe it, but in my mind it's kind of this collaborative contributions that seemed to form a kind of team of researchers in the moments where that was beginning. I don't know if, yeah, is that clear?
Sí.
Okay.
Sí, es que pensaba que querías que Aura tomara de nuevo la palabra, entonces no quería interrumpir eso. Ok, entonces procedo con la respuesta a la pregunta de que me atrajo a esta obra. Creo que es un conjunto de muchas circunstancias. Me acojo a lo que estaba diciendo Nohan Lala, que yo espero estar pronunciando bien el nombre de la compañera, y es que he seguido el trabajo que en este último año ha hecho African in Diaspora y me parece, por no decirlo menos, transformador. Y ya pues este año con algunas compañeras desde el año pasado veníamos como consolidando una idea de cómo pensar la economía de una manera distinta. Eso tomó varios caminos, pero después recibo esta invitación a participar y es como los ancestros me han escuchado. ¿Cómo así que va a haber un estudio de prácticas donde van a preguntarle a gente de toda la afrodiáspora cómo hemos hecho para vivir? ¿Es en serio? ¿Voy a participar en eso? Sí, voy a participar en eso, definitivamente, porque ven lo que me hace sentir bien, me hace sentir feliz, viva, vital, y yo creo que esas son las cosas que tenemos que hacer como mujeres negras, lo que nos apasiona. Y saber que iba a poder tener la posibilidad de conectar con otras mujeres negras que también se están pensando desde la ciencia económica, pero más allá de la ciencia económica, formas para pervivir como pueblo y para liberarnos. Entonces siento que eso me impulsó, ¿no? impulsó porque hay muchas economistas negras, necesitamos más, pero eso, que tengan un pie en lo comunitario, que estén pensando en otras formas de medir el desarrollo, que estén pensando en otros valores que subviertan el contenido de los sistemas de opresión, ese es el sendero que quiero, ¿no? Entonces, siento que Aura ha sido muy generosa conmigo, con nosotras, y creo que Sara está haciendo un gran trabajo en la forma en cómo está conduciendo Africana in Diáspora. Entonces, eso es lo que me motivó.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really deeply resonate, I think, with a lot of the energy and the kind of reflections in terms of, I think, this work very much being about. So I think the title, A Survey of Contemporary Economic Practices, understates really what it is, which is this kind of way of this, as exactly as you've all articulated, of saying we need economic futures that work for people and for planet, so that African life, Afrodescendant life, Black life can thrive and be well. And so let's look at what our people are doing and learn from there. And I think this paper is yeah, a phenomenal kind of landscape bird's eye kind of view of saying, let's look at these examples of what's happening in these different places and see how it is that people are distributing labor, how it is that people are forming alternative ways of saving, and all of those different kind of ways of living that allow for a redefinition of economic practice away from what we're currently accustomed to in the kind of capitalist state that we're in. So yeah, just really appreciating those lenses and the ways that I think the ways that you've all brought a different lens and positionality in terms of approaching the work has made it such a rich and impactful piece. And as you said, both like looking at it from the political science lens and also from the like, how does it work in my family? How does it work in my community lens as well? I think that's really what's quite magical about it and helps it to really stand up as a piece that says, where are the African solutions to the problems that we know are there? Let's start from there and let's expand out and see what else, what does this represent? What's the kind of ideological underpinnings of this? And in it, there's just such rich kind of, yeah, what I would describe as like Pan-Africanist feminist articulation of what economic relationships can look like. And for that, I'm just grateful that that exists in the world, full stop. So yeah, on that note, my next question is kind of what for you were the key learnings that emerged from the research, from the process? What was it? What's your biggest kind of takeaway in terms of what you learned being a part of this? And I'll throw it to any of you once again.
Okay, at the risk of going first again, I think the importance for me of this paper was in my own thinking about how, we think of the economy as not necessarily of, let's say, what is not capitalist economy as not as anti-capitalist economy. And one of the things that I remember reading repeatedly, and I also remember having to shift my thinking around this. Okay, the economy is not a capitalist economy. There have been, and there will always be other forms as legitimate, as even in some contexts, as predominant of organizing life and sustaining life. That needed to shift significantly my thinking to decenter capitalism, not to devalue, but decenter capitalism as a frame of reference in which we think the economy, through which we think the economy, but also through which we think alternatives. Because I feel like the discourse on alternatives always starts with, okay, what can we do counter to capitalism, instead of in what ways has life been sustained and maintained? In what ways have we organized ourselves to ensure provision? And ourselves, by ourselves, I mean African, Black, and Afro-descendant peoples over time in space. organize ourselves to ensure provision? In what ways have we related to our to our environment, our built environments, to ensure that we are well enough, we are well fed? And I think well fed is not just it's not incidentally. I think the biggest learning for me and that I'll carry forever is that there's no revolution, there's no alternative, there's no liberation if we don't start concerning ourselves at the most basic level with what we eat and where it comes from and who controls that. Because if we think of the economy as sustaining life, what are the things that we need to sustain life if not food, right? And I think for me, the beauty of this paper is this: it doesn't go into complex theoretical analysis. It tries to highlight simple things that are part of daily existence, that are actually the framework, the structure for life to exist on this earth, to exist in ways that actually are emancipatory, that are meaningful, that are uplifting, that are non-exploitative, that are regenerative. So for me, that was one of the biggest learnings. And that really brought to the fore for me thinking of other ways of organizing labor. So labor, even in, let's say, a Marxist frame, is always seen as a commodity, right? We ask, well, people need to be well remunerated. And I think that is a very legitimate claim. But what if, in what other ways can labor be organized if not seen as a commodity, but as a means or as a process, as an encounter? So Yanya is here and she will talk more about that, as an encounter for us to do things collectively. So that for me was beautiful. And I think another aspect was, and being a person that generally dwells in the macroeconomic policy framework, to think of liberation not as just something that needs to be
I like the cliffhanger moment. I'm just like, what's she gonna say next?
Yeah, well, I think for a moment I thought it was me because everyone else I think was waiting on tenterhooks. Okay, in the waiting for the end of the cliffhanger, now that you're already spotlighted, Nani, do you want to take it away?
For me, oh no, she's back. Okay, perfect. I'm so glad that I started speaking really slowly.
Oh, sorry. When did you lose me?
It was at the height of the cliffhanger when you were talking about coming from the macroeconomics policy framework, and then you made this gesture and we don't know where it fell.
Okay, so I think I was, let me be quick before the internet plays a trick on me again, but I was saying that for me it was important that that the liberatory practices came with two contents or two significant aspects. One, that they were corrective of the injustices that Black people have faced over time and continue to face, but they were also constructive. So they don't represent just resistance, they represent an architecture and an exercise of autonomy. And those are all learnings that came through the paper and through the different conversations that I had with the different contributors. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thanks for filling in the cliffhanger for us. Nani was about to fill in for you just before you disappeared. So now I feel like we're caught between two cliffhangers. Nani, what were you about to say?
So one thing that really, and I learned a lot of this from Aria when we were talking, because I think in the UK, because a lot of the work that I think we're doing a lot in the UK now is trying to find out the history of solidarity economics initiatives that have existed before. But then at the moment, we're also having a lot of growth of different ways in which people are trying to support their communities. And I remember speaking to Aria about it, and then Aria was like, is this like a liberatory practice, or is this an experiment within liberatory practices? And that's a really key thing that kind of clicked a lot of things in my head, because I think I see a lot of amazing work happening in my immediate world, but then lots of that work is experiments, right? And experiments are not necessarily it's not like that one solution is going to work across all the different things, right? And it's also not that and I really like the idea of experiments, because it's also practice-based, right? So I might try it in wherever, but then you might try it in a different place and it might not work. And for some reason, this was a really big bit of information that I really needed to hear, because I think sometimes it's easier to kind of lump things into, this is the solution, but actually those are just bits of experiments towards different types of solutions. And for me, that was a really key learning for me in taking part in this research as well. And I really enjoyed the idea as well, which also Aria touches on the paper, of how within moving towards liberation, it's just experimentation and practice. And as someone who's very practice orientated, I really enjoyed the idea that I can see lots of different elements, right? And lots of those elements you can just mix. It's basically like cooking, I don't know. And I was just thinking a lot about that. That was just really mind-blowing for me at the time. And also, I really liked the conversations as well. The key learnings for me that kind of emerged from this was just about when we've moved, because I think capitalism makes it really hard to try stuff out, because if you lose, then everyone's you should have just stuck with capitalism. Why would you try and think differently and stuff? And for me, that's always something that's really tricky in terms of thinking about liberation or practices towards liberation. And when I was taking part in this project, I was also thinking about what happens when we think about the processes of dismantling capitalism in the different ways, as opposed to thinking of this one huge outcome, right? Of and I think I see this in a lot of our organizing, or the organizing that I'm involved in. There's all these small processes that we're all doing that are leading to maybe one big outcome, but that outcome is huge and it will take a really long time. But how can I think about emancipatory liberation work as in the small processes, as opposed to these big, I don't know, spectacles or objects? And those are some really key bits that really this project really triggered in me.
Yeah, I just want to sit with some of those bits for a little while, because I feel like there was a lot there. So one thing that was really cute, because obviously people attending haven't yet read the paper, but it's divided into these two kind of sections around emancipatory. I'm gonna butcher the title now. Emancipatory ideological economic practices, and then it's experiments in cooperative or experiments in solidarity economics, essentially. And so I think there's something, so kind of what you're saying, Noni, is that there's that distinction feels important in the work that we're doing. And I wonder if for you, what I was maybe projecting or trying to understand is that this idea of the experiment, is it that what feels different about them is this sense that they could go in any direction, and it's not yet clear what the kind of what the world on the other side looks like. So just trying to kind of understand where that, with that learning around those two frameworks, which I've definitely given the wrong title of, where you felt that distinction. And I guess my question in it is in terms of this work on liberatory economic practice, where does that leave the blueprint for the future, if that makes sense?
So a key bit for me was we were talking about, I remember me and Ari were talking about, there's a certain thing about just because something exists as an alternative to the current economic system doesn't necessarily mean it's anti-capitalist, right? So we have lots of experiments that are happening, there's lots of crowdfunding resources, but does that mean crowdfunding, is that liberatory, is that a emancipatory thing, or is it just an experiment towards anti-capitalism? So it was kind of that, I'm not sure if I'm explaining that well, but just because something is alternative does not mean that it's anti-capitalist. And that was just like a really big blur in my mind.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
that, I
if
think
that's your question, but that.
it does, yeah. That's what I thought you were referring to, but I just wanted to get clarity, because I think that is definitely something I would lift up in the piece as like the kind of ideological framework is so strong, I think, in it. And so that understanding of where there's references to how the cooperative model can also become this competitive model, and how the commons as a resource of shared land can also be about self-actualization, essentially, of a small and privileged community. So actually, like, where we're used to these terms that we associate with emancipation, where are the potential flaws? And where's this, maybe also another question is, where's the space for co-option in these experiments when they are in that nascent form? Which I think, yeah, again, is just really incredible learnings for thinking about liberatory economic futures. Sophia, I'll jump to you, if that's okay next.
Para pensar lo que sigue. Estoy completamente de acuerdo con las líneas que han propuesto las hermanas. Siento que mercado puede volver a un origen. La raíz de la palabra mercado es encuentro, ¿no? Intercambio. Esa es la raíz, que ahora se llama libre mercado y otras cosas. Eso es otra lógica, otros valores, otras prácticas. Y este ejercicio ha servido para que nosotras podamos identificar que hay otros nombres. Entonces, sabemos que la economía y el pensamiento político-económico tiene formas de nombrar que encubren relaciones, ¿sí? Que encubren la explotación, que encubren la opresión, ¿cierto? Tal vez este ejercicio que ha sido de sacar a la luz esas formas propias de nombrar como lo hemos hecho, es una parte que puede alimentar de otra manera el pensamiento económico. Y si por aquí decimos que liberar la tierra para liberarlo todo, entonces podemos estar pensando un futuro donde en una tierra libre podamos encontrarnos, ¿cierto? Y entonces, ¿qué tipo de circunstancias tiene que pasar que alimenten ese futuro deseable? Y estoy pensando en varias cosas. Pienso, por ejemplo, en las redes en esta red que ya existe, ¿cierto? Con las personas que Aurea intercambió y que la estrategia AID ha venido encontrando. Yo quedé fascinada con el pensamiento también de otra economista que invitaron en algún webinario, Leopoldo Legbo-Jampeco, ¿cierto? Y saber que ahora cuento con más referentes que están pensando en estos términos. Nuestro futuro me emociona mucho. Me emociona poder volver a talleres comunitarios y pensar que nuestras prácticas son, como siempre lo hemos sabido, un sustento de realidades distintas, pero también sé que hay otros esfuerzos. Yo no sé si una de las que están escuchando este panel es la coordinadora de investigaciones del Centro de Estudios de Desigualdades del Sur, Pauline Dalami, que abrieron una convocatoria hace poco para justamente investigar cómo en el marco de COVID, ¿cierto? Nosotras tenemos prácticas que responden a cómo la economía no se vuelve a desestabilizar por una situación de crisis pandémica o de crisis alimentaria o de crisis por la biodiversidad o de crisis por lo que llamamos cambio climático, sino que se están pensando otras cosas. Entonces, cómo el pensamiento que estamos haciendo, el pensamiento y la práctica que estamos haciendo mujeres negras en todo el mundo se teje alrededor de eso. Pero también recuerdo que las feministas africanas fueron las primeras en volver a llamar a pensar este tema de la deuda, ¿cierto? De la deuda externa. Y entonces, cuando todo el mundo ya había silenciado el asunto de es necesario terminar la deuda externa y se había vuelto otra vez un tema tabú y no se toca, las feministas africanas dijeron, este es el centro del asunto. Así como redes de mujeres afro-latinoamericanas dijeron, pero también está el asunto de la abolición de las patentes, ¿cierto? En las vacunas. Entonces siento que hay como una red de mujeres, de comunidades que están pensando cómo vamos a sobrevivir en el planeta. Y la forma de sobrevivir es saber que tenemos que liberar la tierra, que tenemos que liberar el conocimiento pero lo más importante para mí es cómo vamos a colocar todo esto que estamos encontrando en recetas, en cuentos, en poemas, en canciones, porque necesitamos transmitirlo ya a niñas y niños. No pueden pasar otros 30 años o 40 años o el tiempo que cada una de nosotras tengamos aquí para que esto sea comunicado a las generaciones que están naciendo y que nacen con una visión cada vez más rigurosa y rígida y estrecha de lo que es el mundo. Esto lo que está haciendo es como, venga, venga, se puede respirar, no nos dejemos alinear. Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a comunicar esto? Lo vamos a volver fanzines, los vamos a traducir en cuantos, lo vamos a volver de qué manera simple, los vamos a volver videos en blogs, no sé, estrategias de comunicación para que esto tenga una transferencia muy rápida a las generaciones que están creciendo. Esas son como algunas de las cosas que he ido imaginando que se pueden conectar, ¿no? Y pues también el desafío de medir distinto. Entonces pienso como en esta red de personas que se han estado reflexionando como ya hacemos otros mundos posibles, porque es que no es que vayan a pasar, es que venimos de eso, ¿no? Los quilombos, los palenques, las sociedades de entierro no se han muerto, están vivas. Y entonces nos enseñan cómo vamos a seguir viviendo los proyectos de cooperación como en Mississippi, ¿no? Cooperation Jackson, que están tan cerca y son una realidad tan visible. Y cómo podemos pensar de nuevo la ciencia económica, si queremos hacer eso, desde otros valores, desde la solidaridad, desde la reciprocidad, desde la compasión, desde la posibilidad de que el centro sea la dignidad y no la acumulación. Sí, creo que esa es la apuesta que estamos teniendo y coincido completamente en que yo no necesito que se llame anticapitalista, yo necesito que se llame digna, yo necesito que su contenido sea ese, porque nos pueden colocar 1000 palabras que lo encubran todo, ¿cierto? Entonces nosotras tenemos el deber y la responsabilidad, el compromiso y el amor de nombrarlo como lo han nombrado las personas que han resistido y con nuestras propias palabras.
Yeah. Just feeling that center being dignity and not accumulation. I think, yeah, letting that kind of wash over us all for a minute, because I think you're, yeah, completely right in terms of what this work, this knowledge can do is important in the sense of how it can guide us into a different way from maybe what we're living on a day-to-day. And I feel deeply that there's I remember essentially, I think that it was the day maybe that Aria sent me the final draft of this. And basically the email said, okay, here it is, what are we doing now? And I think and I feel like that's so the energy of this piece of work, and of, I think, all three of you really as people, it was kind of like this is almost like, okay, we've drawn a little map, that's good. Where are we taking this, and where are we going from here? Because I think it's almost like you're teeing up the work that's to come. It's not that the paper was the work. And that leads me into the next question really, which was around where do you want to see the work go from here? And Sophia, you kind of already touched on how do we translate what's been written into different formats and communicate that with different communities that we're all a part of. But yeah, I think that I love that energy so much of like, okay, cool, now what? And I think, yeah, I'm keen to hear from all of you really, what for you, what the now what is. Sophia, do you want to take it back up and take it from there?
Pues yo sentía que la estaba respondiendo. Sí, creo que lo que sigue es poder conversarlo, encontrarnos para conversarlo con más personas. Creo que podemos pensar en cómo se vuelve una parte, un componente metodológico en los procesos de acompañamiento comunitario, como un insumo, no sé, como pienso en una caja de herramientas, ¿no? Y que eso puede hacerse reflexionando sobre los valores que hay detrás. Hay una compañera que está conectada aquí que hace un gran trabajo alrededor de la sanación del trauma racial a partir de la identificación de los valores capitalistas. Entonces pienso que a partir de ese trabajo, o más como una continuación, podemos decir, estas experiencias locales tienen estos valores y se vuelven el centro para formular política pública, para formular planes de organización comunitaria, para pensar. Pensaba qué bonito sería una idea, que en los colegios donde están los niños y las niñas hubiera su profesor o su profesora tuviera que decirles, vamos a practicar susu, vamos a hacer cadenas, ¿no? Entonces tú vas a aportar lo de tu recreo, tal, ¿no? Y entonces ya se va instalando en la cabeza otra forma de relacionarse, ¿no? De relacionarse. No todo tiene que ser lucro, ¿no? O eso, comunitariamente, que yo sé que eso ya se hace en muchas comunidades intencionadas, pero esta idea de cómo se hace más intencional la práctica de, yo puedo cocinar en mi casa hoy para tales vecinos y tales vecinas y ustedes pueden cuidarme los hijos, ¿no? Y yo sé que esas son experiencias que ya se están haciendo en muchos lugares del mundo. El asunto es cómo lo estamos haciendo y cómo se puede vivir eso en los lugares donde vivimos como gente negra, con todas las cosas que tenemos encima. Nuestros horarios laborales no son los mismos, estamos en la informalidad, ¿no? Pero cómo hacemos que pase y cómo se apoya a esos colectivos que hacen que pase, ¿cierto? Pero también cómo colocamos esto en los lugares donde también tienen que estar. Entonces imagino, por ejemplo, estas cumbres mundiales, ¿no? O estos términos cuando hay que hablar con la Organización Mundial del Comercio, que hay que hablar con el Fondo Monetario Internacional, o que hay que hablar con la Cooperación para el Desarrollo y decir, con nosotras no se van a relacionar de cualquier manera. Sus valores, su acción, ¿refleja estos valores o no aceptamos su acción? ¿Cierto? Porque es en todas las dimensiones, en las dimensiones de la cotidianidad donde juegan las niñas y los niños, pero también en esos escenarios donde están tomando decisiones sin nosotras, que tienen que ver con nosotras, ¿sí? Entonces siento que eso pues se va tejiendo, siento que ya hay muchas voluntades involucradas para eso, que no estamos empezando, que estamos continuando, y nosotros lo que estamos haciendo es una actualización de la resistencia. Nosotros somos el antivirus. En este momento, entonces es como, bueno, parte, no solamente nosotros, un montón de gente, pero nosotras hacemos lo que nos toca, nuestra partecita. Y lo ponemos a circular ahí, a ver cómo se va cocinando la receta. Eso pienso.
Yeah, I love that we're staying in these food analogies. I really, really appreciate that. And just want to lift up that idea of like this, taking this forward as a methodological kind, is that what you said? Methodological kind of practice and process. Like, how do we continue to hold that balance of like, how do the values reflect the actions? I think that's, yeah, such an important way of like how we can implement and move forward with this. Aria, do you want to step in?
Yeah, Sophia always gets me fired up. I love listening to her. She's like a mermaid. But I think the beautiful thing about what she said, and then it reminded me of the process of first where we got the material for this research. And I think it's not incidental that these practices, just like saving groups, kishikila, as we call it here in Angola, practices such as collective labor, they're documented not in the traditional academic archives. They're documented in stories, they're documented in narratives, in blogs, in communities, in community organizations' websites. And I think the end goal of this piece is not to get, these practices put in an academic paper. If anything, for me, I envisage a process where we are co-creating and co-building our systems of knowledge, knowing each other. And I think in a conversation that I had with Sophia and Wendelin, the translator was present, we had talked about this, the richness of having this transcontinental conversation that really inverts how, first, we're not supposed to talk to each other, right? A historical mark of the transatlantic slave trade was to sever these ties. And I think there's already power in reconnecting and in bringing back and in taking and giving this feedback on the ways we are existing and resisting across the different bounds. Because in so many ways, knowledge is erased. And it's erased because we try to put it in academia, but also erased because we don't tell each other. Let me give you an example. The conversation, a beautiful conversation I had for this piece was with a family, a Quilombola family in Brazil. The paper tells more about it. And it was beautiful because in that conversation, there was, the family was the couple, and then the mother of one of the couple members. And this is a woman, she's probably in her 70s. And she was telling me a story. We talked for almost 3 hours. And she was telling me a story of how the Quilombola farming practice happens, how they sow, how they use the fire, and so on and so forth. And then more of the reference material came from a child's book. They made a children's book that is to be circulated in schools, to be used in school to teach members of the Quilombola community about not only how to farm, but also the political and ancestral importance of maintaining these practices. And I think that's the way I see this work continuing, in enabling us to continue telling our stories and continue reclaiming the space for legitimacy of our stories. It's very our stories of life, not just stories, but our stories of how we live. There's so many things that are out of this paper that we couldn't do because of constraints of time and mobility. And the reason I chose and I wanted to call this paper a survey is to give the idea that this is not a final product. It's not a compendium. It's where maybe we I don't want to say start, because we have started in different spaces. It's where perhaps we start coming together to continue telling this narratives and continue connecting with each other, because the struggles, for example, that people in North Africa and West Africa are facing, and what they're doing in terms of keeping indigenous seeds as relevant for the struggles that Afro-diasporic people have in Colombia and Brazil, and as relevant, for example, in Southern Africa, where the movement faces a lot of structural challenges. And particularly in the context of Angola, where a narrative is being pushed that indigenous seeds are bad. If we don't talk to each other, we are not going to know the ways in which we are actually already living these realities that are emancipatory. For me, I think this launch and this research is an invitation for everyone to really start thinking of the ways in their families, in their communities, they've been seeing these parts of potential economic liberation, and how we can connect the dots and teach each other and experiment and build solidarity, not just in political terms, but in terms of practicing together. Because I totally agree with what Jania said. Only in this way, in knowing our values, in knowing our history, we're going to be able to engage and demand the things that we want. Because a lot of times our demands are framed in terms of the language that doesn't reflect our values. So I'm hoping this research will take us closer to somewhere like that.
Preach, yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, the definitely the survey, naming it as a survey, I think is definitely, for me, an exciting opening to where next and what next can be added to this kind of exploration and dialogue. We're just running out of time a little bit. So Noni, do you want to respond to this? And I just want to encourage anyone that does have a question to put it in the Q&A box in the next couple of minutes so that it gets answered before we wrap up. But yeah, I'll just pass it over to you, Noni.
Cool. I actually don't have a lot to add because everyone has just said, it's just, yeah, I'm so excited for us to kind of, the main thing that I'm really looking forward to though is like all the different practices. Like there's this one that I wrote down from reading the paper, which is like Minga, which is like Ethiopian farmers organize themselves in collective structures to then go from one farm to another farm to another farm and to work together. And I imagine how many solutions the world would have if we just like, you know, I go to this other place to like, I don't know, I'm thinking about how we can then apply lots of these practices in our own lives. Like I'm just thinking in the UK, like if we go and squat this one place and then we go together, then we go and squat this other place, what that would look like. And also this kind of reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. I don't know where I heard it from, but I know it, and it's like something about Black action is Black feminist praxis. And I really like that, of just like, what are we doing next? And I feel like I'm just really, with this paper, I know, yeah, like I know there's a survey of the things that are happening and like what else can happen after that. So I'm just really fired up. That's all I have to add. I'm just like, what are we doing next? What are we doing? I'm gonna go to, like, I just want to go to another farm and another farm and then another farm, and that's it.
Love that, absolutely love that. Whilst we don't have any questions yet, I'm gonna pass over to Aria, because I know that the kind of next question that I wanted to pose was around if there were any quotes or pullouts or anything particular from the text you wanted to share. Noni, you've kind of cheekily led us in already with talking about Minga, so I'll take that one from you. And then Aria, I know you wanted to share, do a short reading for us, essentially, from the text, which I think would be wonderful. So yeah, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Zara. I wanted to read the conclusion. I think the conclusion gives I tried in the conclusion to pack my own, let's say, learnings and reflections about the paper. So let me offer you the gift of my voice. The wealth of liberatory economic practice systems and structures presented in this paper strongly evidences that a world beyond capitalism not only is possible, but that it is a reality lived by many African, Afrodescendant, and Black communities globally. Although the surveyed practices vary significantly in their manifestations, histories, and liberatory content, jointly analyzed, they offer useful insights for the prefigurative politics of anti-capitalist resistance. Three considerations are worth highlighting. One, economic liberation need not to be merely defined as an ideal or a macro-level process of transformation of society-wide power relations. Rather, it is embedded as an ecosystem of everyday practices that forefront the satisfaction of community needs through collective, regenerative, and ecological ways of producing and caring for each other. In this sense, a meaningful liberatory economic practice is rooted in social relations that democratize economic power and challenge oppressive, exploitative, and unequal structures and processes. Two, economic liberation is a collective process, political process of self-determination. On the one hand, this implies that emancipatory practice is informed by, or at least relates to, historically grounded, contemporary relevant, and forward-facing liberatory political ideologies. Liberatory economic practices exist within a spectrum of rebellion revolution, through which communities either subvert certain fundamental aspects of capitalism or put forward radical propositions to overthrow it. From this perspective, it becomes clear that there's no such a thing as non-ideological economic liberation. The other implication is that economic liberation cannot be forged merely through one practice. At best, individual practices offer valuable insight into possible pathways towards the liberation and can thus inspire transformative political action. These points are particularly important important to counter neoliberal framings of economic liberation that are predicated on individualized, competitive, and exploitative processes of wealth accumulation. Finally, economic liberation is inextricably linked to a deliberate recuperation and affirmation of indigenous knowledge systems and practices, while at the same time forging new ways of living, responding to contemporary challenges. African feminists make this prescient by affirming their struggle as a process of crafting new identities for African women, identities as full citizens, free from patriarchal oppression, with rights of access, ownership, and control over resources in our bodies, and utilizing positive aspects of our cultures in liberating and nurturing ways. We must find something different, not obsessed by a desire to catch up with Europe. Fanon exhorted. Thus, it is in this dialectical process of the old and the new, of looking within and looking around, of resistance and rebellion, that economic liberation takes shape. The intrinsic value of the African economic liberatory practices this paper presented lies in providing us with different points of departure. Our relationship with each other, our relationship with our environment, and the ways in which we show up and care for each other in the processes of transforming our worlds. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that with us. We just have a couple of minutes left, and there's no questions in the chat at the moment, so I wonder if you wanted to share any final reflections. One thing I did want to name just before we officially log off is that I think one thing I wanted in this conversation that we're having to lift up is around this point of the encounter that you made. And I think, Sophia, this is something that I believe you spoke about a lot when you were speaking with Ariane, that came through in the text as well. And I think one thing that I'm consistently moved by and find kind of grounding in when thinking about the importance of this work and this paper is the way in which this encounter has been part of the process, in terms of, as you were talking about, Sophia, it's building, it's this network that has become created through this constellation of conversations. Ara, you were describing this conversation with this family, those encounters, and even as you were talking, Noni, about Minga and these moments of people joining, and how the one-on-one or the collective encounters or the familial encounters, and how that feels very core to the work and to the practices themselves, as well as to how, when we're exploring this kind of work, that also feeds in and becomes part of the process to some degree also. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of celebrate that and share a sense of an important sense of grounding it in what that means, what that does, and the energy that creates in terms of how we move forward from here. One question is, how might I join or support these efforts? We'll drop a bunch of links on a very practical level as to who we are and what we do and how you can stay in touch. But yeah, that's the kind of final thoughts from me. I don't know if anyone else wanted to kind of had anything on their heart they wanted to share before we close.
I had one thing, which is a great quote that I also picked out from the paper, which is liberatory politics is a collective process of caring for the commons, common needs, common danger, and common possibility to create the world, which I love, because most of the time when people talk about commons, it's like water, air, which is all really important, and I love that. But also, like, it's actually that just, yeah, I love that so much. And it's just, I think I'm going to be thinking about that a lot when I leave this place.
Thank you. Yes, love that articulation of the commons. Sophia, did you want to add anything? You're on mute, Sophia.
Creo que para todas o para la mayoría este ejercicio fue conseguir las palabras que no teníamos cuando estábamos en la facultad. Y es como, profe, esto era lo que yo quería decirle. Entonces era como, es que lo que usted me está enseñando, lo que yo estoy leyendo, lo que estamos proyectando en modelos econométricos y en funciones, no me cuadra, no me cuadra. Entonces, como ese individuo que toma decisiones racionales, ¿cierto? Y que está pensando siempre en maximizar, optimizar su beneficio, realmente es una apuesta que está construyendo la ciencia económica, ignorando de eso no es lo que ocurre alrededor y sobre todo que hay grupos de personas, poblaciones enteras, comunidades enteras, que no puede ser ese su punto de partida, porque si fuera su punto de partida nos explicaría que hoy todavía estuviéramos con vida. ¿Sí? Entonces, si hoy estamos ante muchas amenazas que nos hablan de escasez, que nos hablan de racionalidad, que nos hablan de optimización, que nos hablan de acumulación, y que nos dicen que todo eso es un pensamiento ordenado y civilizado y tienen el temor de pensar lo comunitario y lo colectivo como algo primitivo, tenemos que empezar a desbordar y desmarcar qué significa lo primitivo, ¿cierto? Desmarcar qué significa la escasez y qué significa incluso asuntos como la pobreza y la riqueza, ¿cierto? Y cómo vamos a pensar que en lugar de individuos estamos hablando de personas, en lugar de sociedades estamos hablando de comunidades, y cómo cuando nosotras incluso estamos elaborando textos, cuando nosotras estamos generando ese pensamiento, ese conocimiento que se circula en la academia y que se circula comunitariamente, nos afirmamos en nuestros propios términos para que no permitamos que esos contenidos sigan siendo vaciados, que es lo que ha sido continuamente la historia de la colonización. Entonces, eso es lo que quería compartir finalmente, porque mi frase favorita del estudio ya la leyó Aurea, que tiene que ver como, y tal vez solamente para reafirmarme en que la liberación económica es un proceso político de autodeterminación, y eso le sirve al pueblo negro para seguir siendo pueblo en el mundo, pero eso nos sirve a todos los pueblos, a todas las personas que nos estemos pensando dentro de la dignidad que significa compartir este mundo con otras especies.
Okay, thank you so much. We're just a little bit over time, so I think we're going to wrap up there on that note of, yeah, that in memory, in vindication, and in power and movement of liberatory economics as a political and liberatory process. And I just want to say a huge thank you for all of the work that all three of you have done towards this piece. I'm so happy and proud to be able to share it. I'm so impressed. Yeah, I'm just excited and yeah, grateful. So yeah, this has been real until we do it all again.
I want to say, everyone, follow Sophia and follow Noni. They're doing amazing work, and follow AID and keep in
follow
touch.
Uria.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.